Hello, class, and welcome to This Week in Developmental Psychology. My name is Dr. Neil Soggie. This week we're going to be exploring adolescence. Now, the term adolescence comes from the Latin word that means to grow or to mature. And as it's used today more broadly, the meaning alludes to the maturation of someone into adulthood. Both physical maturation as well as emotional and social maturation. Now, G. Stanley Hall is usually credited for formalizing the whole concept of adolescence. Hall is noted for some early research into growth and development during this time of life, and his ideas about the nature of adolescence really continue to influence our thinking today. Adolescence at the time was not even recognized as a part of human growth and development. And so it was really G. Stanley Hall that kind of brings out that there isn't a sharp transition between childhood and adulthood, that there is a time of what he called storm and stress, or in his words, Sturm und Drang, which was about recognizing that this is a time of unsettled turbulence, of trying to figure out how the world works, of trying to figure out how you fit into the world. Now, oftentimes, researchers will, or people in the general public rather, will define the stage of adulthood as that cycle between the ages of 11 or 12 through to 18. But you can really think of it psychologically as really almost extending into up almost to the age of about 25, because that the brain structure is actually continually changing up until that age of about 25. There's some rapid growth and development that takes place. And it's really characterized by being able to find your own self-control, your own place in the world, of rapidly changing physically and psychologically, and exploring your take on social issues and how you will respond to the world around you. So it's about establishing your patterns of choices and your basic sense of identity. Now, Piaget has given a definition of adolescence from a psychological point of view, and according to him, psychologically, adolescence is the age when the individual becomes integrated into the society of adults, and the age when the child no longer feels that they're below their elders, but rather that they are becoming equal to their elders. And for some, depending upon the society that you're in, by the age of 18 to 21, they will consider that to be the end of adolescence. But as far as some of the physical changes that are taking place, there's some fairly substantial physical changes that take place, depending upon the society that you're in and your exposure to various chemicals and hormones. Puberty can be onset anywhere from the age of 10 or 11 through to as late as 14. Puberty means the beginning of that sexual maturity, and due to sexual maturity having a lot of physiological and structural changes within the body, it's a time of adjusting your relationship with yourself as well and your own body. So there is a recognition that there's fast growth and structural changes in the body, and the individual is also struggling with desires to be free and independent of all authority as they are dealing with these bodily structures. So in a traditional sense, adolescence is really kind of seen as a transitional period. It is a period of change from childhood through to adulthood. And during this period, as with any transitional period, the status roles are vague and there can be confusion. And that is something that I want you to kind of keep in mind, is that the confusion within adolescence is really profound. And for those of you that are still in that age of adolescence, I'm sure you recognize that. Adolescents develop new attitudes towards themselves as well as towards others. Parents also change their expectations from the adolescent. The adolescent is expected to take on more responsibility and adopt adult ways of behavior, but within limitations. There isn't the full freedom generally that adults enjoy that are given to adolescents. So that can be very frustrating when there is, for the adolescent and for the other adults, as the adolescent transitions into adulthood. The many physical change of the body leads to changes as well in personality of the individual. The ideas, the thinking, the personality traits that are admired before adolescence seem to be childish and undesirable. And so a new set of values and norms begins to emerge, and so the individual will tend to feel confusion and will need to reestablish new relationships with others, find new friends, break old friends, be eager to find new abilities. There's a newfound admiration oftentimes for the opposite sex, where certain traits of peers of the opposite sex are admired by adolescents. Boys are admired by girls for such traits as frankness, for example, or protectiveness, or maybe a good sense of humor. Boys admire qualities of girls such as intelligence or friendly manners or kindness. These kinds of things are often not admired in children, but as you get into that older stage, they become more important. There's also a change of the expression in emotions. Emotional expressions of adolescence is really greatly influenced by maturity and training. The adolescent does not express their emotions directly like a young child does. They tend to have more control over them, but oftentimes will feel even more deeply because there is this time of confusion and frustration. And so at times a person can feel almost overwhelmed. Now, this can be a blessing in some ways, in artistic pursuits, for example, like in poetry, where the inspiration is emotion, for example, in lyric poetry. Then there can be some great productive inspiration with this transitional time within emotions. But it can also be overwhelming. Now, adolescence, remember, is a period when the person begins to experience some individual emancipation. Within Western culture, this is emphasized in the teenage years by getting levels of independence. For example, you get your ability to have your driver's license. That can vary from 15 or 16 in some locales to as late as 18 in parts of Europe. But this emancipation means that there's a new sense of self-definition in the many ways that you can express yourself, in the ways that you can travel, in the ways that you can interact with others. And there's a high value placed on movement and action of the self and others, and a tendency to band together in finding unique subcultures of identities. And so adolescents are focused on and preoccupied with a number of tasks that are taking place within their life. And we'll see a little bit later on in this lecture why these tasks are important, because there is changing in the ways of thinking. So for adolescents, there is a preoccupation with, for example, trying to crystallize their identity in mastering and struggling with autonomy. And that can go many different ways. Some will resist autonomy and will resist moving away from home, for example, and others will, they can't get out of the house fast enough. There's alternating stimulation and boredom that takes place during this time, when there is a struggle with finding ways to engage within the world. And so boredom can become a very dangerous thing at this time. Being sociable with one's own age group is part of the struggle here, as well as experiencing physical maturation and all the physical changes that are taking place. That changes the sense of identity, because your body's continually changing, and that can be very difficult and frustrating. There's achieving a variety of environmental experiences, of going different places, of learning how to engage with the environment in different ways. And that can be tied in with several different types of experiences. So, for example, it can be a new experience to be an adolescent experiencing a growth spurt and then have to go hike up a mountain, because it might be very painful for the joints to be able to do that, whereas as a child it was very easy to do. Or maybe you are a young adolescent that enjoys being at parties in groups, but then are experiencing the first menstruation and some of the frustrations with that. There's also the sexual issues with males and the presence of sperm, and maturation and the production of the organs, and the development of the secondary sex characteristics, and all that entails with that. So the developmental tasks that go on within adolescence are such things as, first off, achieving a new, or one might say a more mature relationship with their age groups, where sexuality becomes more important within the group. An achievement of a sense of the interaction between the masculine and the feminine within social roles within the group, and that can be a significant struggle. There is the accepting of one's physique and using one's body effectively in communication. That can be difficult to master. There is the achieving of emotional independence from parents and others, and because the ways of thinking is changing, romantic attachments can be extremely powerful, and in fact can be overwhelming at times, and that can cause serious problems when there's a breakup, for example. There is also the ideas of new transitions into committed relationships or marriages or family life. that might be taking place at this time. There's the preparing for an economic career, or the questioning about where one might fit in. What are one's skills? What is the marketable skills which one can use? And how can we balance that with what one actually enjoys doing? There is the desiring and achieving of socially responsible behavior. Where can I fit into society? How can I be a good citizen within society? And how can I manage all of that? These are questions that adolescents will definitely ask. And these are developmental tasks that need to be mastered. And it's important, I think, that we give the adolescent the place to be able to explore and discuss these abilities and explore these attitudes that are leading into adulthood and helping them to achieve these accomplishments while allowing them to struggle. These are not easy tasks. These are not easy questions. And so there will be many conflicts within the individual and between individuals, and can sometimes be troublesome interactions with family members and with friends. And that is why G. Stanley Hall called this Sturm und Drang, the storm and stress of adolescence, because of this. Now, when we look at Piaget, we can start to see why this is the case. And this is because Piaget identifies a way of cognitive development that begins to take place, where there is a shift to a new way of thinking about the world. And it is the adult way of thinking about the world, but it is the first time an adolescent or this one individual has thought this way. And so it is frightening and overwhelming and difficult at times. And this is known as formal operations. The formal operational stage begins at approximately the age of 12 and lasts into adulthood. But it takes time to transition. And as adolescents enter this stage, they begin to gain the ability to think in an abstract manner and begin to be able to manipulate ideas in their head without any dependence upon any concrete manipulation. They begin to be able to think logically, deductively, inductively. They begin to be able to do mathematical calculations, think creatively, to use abstract reasoning, and to imagine the outcomes of particular actions. And the skill of metacognition really starts to develop profoundly at this time. And not all of the thought processes are perfect in that first part of formal operations, but it is the time of discovering and the time of reflecting upon and thinking about thinking. So whereas as a child you simply accepted everything that your parents said, as an adolescent with your newfound ability to think about thinking, or metacognition, you begin to question. You begin to question your own thinking. You begin to question the thinking of others, particularly those in authority, particularly those that may not recognize that you are changing as an adolescent. So by using metacognition, the adolescent is more likely to assess how they are thinking and to transform it in a more effective form of problem solving, because metacognition really is simply thinking about thinking. And it is the ability to run through your own thoughts to figure out how you developed that process and maybe unwind some things that aren't logical and can be disproven. And so it's a wonderful skill to have, because you can take apart and rebuild your thinking process and develop a more solid way of thinking. But it also means that there can be some self-questioning within that, and that emotionally can be difficult to handle, particularly as you are just learning how to develop this. So it was actually John Flavel, an American psychologist, that proposed the theory of metacognition in the 1970s, but it really does tie in very strongly with Piaget's earlier perspective of the formal operational stage. So the consequences of the formal operational stage of thought are that adolescents are now able to think abstractly and hypothetically. They exhibit many new ways of reflecting upon their information. For example, they demonstrate greater introspection or thinking about one's thoughts and feelings. They begin to imagine how the world could be, which leads to them becoming very idealistic or insisting upon high standards of behavior. They become very critical of others at times, especially adults in their life. And additionally, adolescents can demonstrate hypocrisy in profound ways or pretend to be what they are not. And since they're at that phase of still learning about themselves, they may not even realize this and may be very critical, for example, of their teachers, not recognizing that their teachers are hard-working professionals that are there to help them. And instead they might develop animosity towards them. And that same can happen towards their parents or other people in authority. And lastly, adolescents can exhibit what is known as pseudo-stupidity. And this has been an approach to problems where they simply make the level of thinking too complex. And so they feel overwhelmed and they begin to fail at tasks that are in actuality rather simple. And because of this new ability to consider alternatives, they haven't quite mastered completely the limiting of these alternatives, they begin to appear what we call stupid, and when they are in fact very bright, and they're just not experienced in a particular field. And so that is why that pseudo-stupidity is there. It's not really that they're not bright, it's just that either this is a new situation and they feel overwhelmed by the alternatives, or they're just simply trying to develop a heuristic for solving the problem, but they are making a heuristic that is very complicated when it doesn't need to be. So, formal operations, the ability to think abstractly, a very important part of the adolescent experience. And then there is Erik Erikson's values development of identity versus role confusion. And this is in Erik Erikson's psychosocial development, and this stage occurs during adolescence between the ages of approximately 12 and 18. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be solidified here, and it can be changed in there, but during this stage, adolescents explore their independence and develop a sense of self. They identify with something that they are good at, and they tend to hold to that thing that they are good at very, very strongly, even if it isn't something that's really all that practical in the real world. According to Erikson, people progress through a series of stages as they grow and change throughout life. And during each stage, everyone faces a developmental conflict. And this conflict must be resolved to successfully develop and find their place in a healthy, virtue-laden stage. And Erikson was interested in how social interaction and relationships affect the development and growth. So, within the psychosocial conflict in primary one in adolescence is identity versus role confusion. Now, we'll see later on that in later adolescence or in early adulthood, intimacy versus isolation becomes part of this as well. But primarily within adolescence, the psychosocial conflict is identity versus role confusion. The question is, who am I? And what does it mean when I say, I am this? And it's really about a sense of self, a sense of who I am and who I am not. My values, my take on the world, my pattern of choices. And the important events that take place are the social relationships. How will I engage the world? And as a person transitions from childhood to adulthood, these adolescents begin to feel confused and insecure about themselves and how they fit into society. And as they seek to establish a sense of self, adolescents begin to experiment with different roles and activities and behaviors, different looks, different hairstyles, different hair colors. According to Erikson, this is important in the process of forming a strong identity and developing a sense of direction in life. And one of the main elements of Erikson's psychosocial stage theory is the development of ego identity, this sense of who I am. So Erikson identifies this as a fundamental organizing principle which develops constantly throughout the lifespan, but is crucially important to get clear in adolescence. So it gives the adolescent a sense of self-sameness, a sense of continuity within the self and their interaction with others. Otherwise, they might feel split about who they are. It gives them a sense of uniqueness where they can frame themselves in a way that differentiates themselves from others in their interaction with others and informing their own opinions and their own choices. And it's about psychosocial development, of having a sense of your own mental and physical health within this stage. And so identity versus role confusion stage has that conflict that is centered upon developing a personal identity. Now, if you look at role confusion, what does role confusion look like? Well, it's where you're not allowed to test out different identities, but you're left with simply not sure how you fit into life, being unsure of who you are or where you fit, of drifting from one job and relationship to another, of feeling disappointed and confused about your place in life. And it's recognizing that there are many different things that go into constructing a sense of identity. There's your gender identity, your race, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your religion, your spirituality, your abilities, the abilities that are recognized by others, the socioeconomic status, your nationality. All of these can play a role in forming what your identity is. And there are numerous benefits of shaping and forming an identity. You develop a sense of commitment, of resolving that crisis, and you know where you fit, the kind of path that you're on in some ways. It may be a very unique path, but you know what social groups you feel comfortable with, that you can associate with. You get a sense of self-confidence, a sense that you can trust your own abilities and qualities and judgments, a sense of independence, but also a sense of belonging, a sense of fidelity, that you know who you are and can form some genuine relationships and make some choices within your own life. And there are some ways that people can go through the process of forming an identity, and this is where I'm going to kind of close out our lecture, looking at what James Marcia describes as the different identity statuses. And people can go through each of these statuses, or maybe they just go to one and hold on to it. There is, first off, identity diffusion, also what we know as role confusion. And this is where a person simply gives up, and they're not exploring their identity, and they just accept that they're lost, and they will oftentimes just go into a cycle of feeling lost and then oftentimes turning to substances in order to dull that, or go to some kind of addiction in order to dull that feeling of feeling lost and empty. The other identity is what is known as identity foreclosure, and that is where you commit to an identity without exploring other options. And oftentimes it's from peer pressure, conformity, or you find something that you're really good at, like, say, for example, you're really good at ballet. And so you form your whole identity around ballet, or you form your whole identity around playing a musical instrument, or form your whole identity around looking really good. Well, all those are fine in that they manage some anxiety. Unfortunately, they also are very limiting in their kind of identity. Another kind of identity foreclosure would be you choose a career path and that becomes your identity. Well, that's fine, but what happens when you lose that job? Well, then there is a massive crisis because you don't know who you are. And so the next two statuses of identity are probably the more valued to go through. The next identity status is what is known as identity moratorium. Moratorium is where you have a period of active exploration, where you try different things, you fail at numerous things, and you find what works, you find what doesn't work, and you are actively seeking out alternatives, but you don't really know. And the value of this stage is that once you do finally commit, and you can live in identity moratorium for the rest of your life, but it's not very helpful to do so, because that it's like being lost all the time. But if you try on different things here and there, then you can move to identity achieved. And identity achieved is that status where you have explored different options and you made commitments to different parts of different options to create and commit to your own unique identity. Now, this is something that doesn't necessarily happen at the end of adolescence. Can be a long, lifelong process of creating yourself and recreating yourself with some strong core commitments. But it's where you have a good, strong sense of yourself apart from things like career or that one thing that you're good at. That might be part of who you are, but you recognize that that isn't all of who you are. So the benefits of having a strong identity are that you begin to be able to commit to core values that can motivate you, that can give you strength throughout the rest of your life. And the last thing I want to kind of leave you with is that research has shown that there are a couple of life tasks that an adolescent needs to go through in order to achieve identity achievement. And these life tasks are, first off, moving away from home, get out from your parents' rules, get out from the rules of whatever group has formed your rules throughout your life, and learn how to live with your own internal rules and to choose your own internal rules. That is the first life task. And to create your own community, not just create a community that is ready-made, not showing up at the bar and choosing that as your group, or showing up at a religious institution and choosing that as your group, but finding your own individuals that you decide that you like, that you want to spend time with. And then spending several years helping others. Moving away from home, being lonely and finding your own group, and helping others are three of the primary tasks that go into helping someone find their identity achievement. Now, it doesn't mean that moving through this stage of adolescence and completing that task of identity versus role confusion is easy. It's not easy. But it is an important part of what it means to emerge into adulthood in a good place. And I hope you enjoyed this class, and you take care, and I'll see you next week. You take care. Bye-bye.